So at this point, we all understand there's going to be a number of consequences coming from the COVID-19 situation. The entire country, the economy has been hit in a number of ways. And one of the industries and the sectors that was kind of on the front lines of that was education. I think most of us know by now that all schools are pretty much done for the year on as far as a physical location and moved online. That looks different, school to school for the K through 12, but on the higher ed side, most colleges have moved to an online platform, whether they had one before or not. And so that is what it is. And one of the big conversations that was happening very early on and a fear that grew was the recruitment. And being around admissions and hearing these discussions, a lot of people were worried about making their class or getting their numbers of freshmen and transfers coming in next year. And I didn't understand it. For a while, I was really confused. I'm just like, I get that we can't show off our school, but no other school can show off theirs either. I'm like, these students aren't just going to disappear into a gap. Like, they can come, they're going to go to a school. Education is not going anywhere. That's one industry I'm not worried about. People want education. And so every other school is at the same disadvantage we are. These students are going to go to a school. You might not be able to sway as many as you were able to before, but it's not like no one's going to show up. Now we're at a point where we're discussing extending social distancing to some extent all the way through 2022. Now we got a very different discussion. And so there's a lot of competing information out there, but there's some that very much believe that, and of course, we're never going to just click and go back to normal, but there's a lot of people that believe we won't really get out of quarantine for another year. And so as we're talking about envisioning fall 2021 and opening up school with online courses, no physical again, now we're talking about a very, very different discussion. And so I would have to turn my whole opinion in this discussion if that's what we're looking at. And so for me, I look at it as a lot of things are going on, a lot of things uncertain. But if that were the case where we were still online, then as an incoming freshman or an incoming student new to college, I would take a gap year. That would be my advice. There's a number of reasons, but it all starts with the cost. And this is definitely a bigger conversation, but students and parents are consumers. That's what education is right now. It's a product. And that was true before the pandemic, and it's 1,000 times true now, as people have been hit in different ways financially. When we come out of this, it will be a recession. And so people are looking for cost savings. On top of that, there's a fear. There might be students and parents that are scared that it's not safe to be on campus with other people. And there's going to be students that were reluctant to leave home before, and now they really don't want to leave home. And parents that probably didn't want their students to leave home, and they really aren't going to let them leave now. And so at the end of the day, the whole thing is going to come down to cost, because that's a big thing, one way or the other. And the fact of the matter is there's expectation and reality. So we could talk about practicality. We could talk about natural disaster, the government. Hey, this isn't our fault. That's fine. But the point is, people expect one thing. And if they don't get that, then it becomes an issue. So if you go to a restaurant, order a steak, they say, hey, I'm sorry, we're out of steak. And you say, okay, well, give me the cheeseburger instead. And they say, okay, we'll give you the cheeseburger, but we're going to charge you the same for the steak. Like, no, I'm not getting steak anymore, so don't charge me for that. And I think right now there's a little bit of a leeway. There was a little bit of leeway because it happened in the middle of the semester. No one knew. But even now, there are a lot of people upset with the classes. And we're not talking about all the other things that come with a campus. We're just talking about the classes, the tuition. And so people are having class action lawsuits against schools. There are a lot of people demanding refunds and rebates because, again, doesn't matter what the practicality of it is. The reality is they expected this type of education and they're not getting it. Now, there's students that might plan on going into a fully online program next year. That's what their plans were before. And that's fine. But the vast majority are looking for a specific type of physical residential education, even if they're commuting. And they're not going to get that. And if they don't get that, then justifying the cost of it is now going to be a very different conversation. And so I can definitely understand that because that's how economy works. And so when you start having conversations about taking the classes at a community college because it's going to be cheaper, and how can you really argue with somebody that wants to save money at this point if everybody's going to be online? And the professors might be different at the institutions, but with the online platform, it very much could even things out. And so all this comes down to cost. There's a lot going on with the stimulus and trying to help colleges bridge the gap. But the fact is, a lot of colleges aren't about to cut costs, and they might only do it to a certain extent. There's people asking for a half off reduction in tuition. I can't see that happening. A lot of schools were just barely floating by like some small businesses were, and this has rocked them and they're on the brink of closing. I mean, there's a lot of schools in Illinois that were already in, some type of financial strain way before this pandemic. And so now that a lot of that's going on, these colleges need that money. The way a lot of them are structured, they need that money. They need those tuition dollars. They need those fee dollars. And so it's going to look very difficult to me to see someone say, okay, we're not going to collect those fee dollars and we're not going to collect those tuition dollars at the same rate. And we're not talking about less students. We're talking about we're going to reduce the amount. So if you think about this, like any business, let's take the movies because that's one that loves to do it. If they start getting less customers at a movie theater, which happens over years, what did they do? They didn't reduce the price. They put the price up. Since we got less people, we need to make more money per ticket. And so the same thinking, not to say that's going to happen, but the same thinking is going to be the initial thought process when looking at how to pay for school. So I don't see deep reductions coming. It's not practical. And if it is, there's going to be a lot of people cut. So anyway, that's the cost. Now, back to the classroom. These classrooms, this education wasn't designed for this. Again, you got professors that may never have taught an online class, may never even really interacted with the online platform to do assignments. And now they're in charge of conducting an entirely virtual experience. And again, I think there's a little leeway because it's in the middle of the semester. But going fresh next year to the fall, I don't expect anybody to cut anybody any slack. And you're going to be dealing with professionals that this is not their area of expertise, and professionals that have been delivering their content in a specific way for a long time, and it's hard for them to adapt. And not to mention the way we've been taught to learn. And so again, there's some people that sign up for a fully online program or mostly online program. But when you have students that signed up for the traditional education and now you're asking them to be educated in a very different way, that's going to knock them. That's not going to, the professors might struggle to adapt, but it's going to affect and knock the students as far as their grades and everything. So if I'm coming in for my first time in college, why do I want to put myself in a situation where I'm jeopardizing my GPA already? Because when you go down the line, they're not going to say, oh, we understand that was the corona quarantine. We understand this grade, this was the corona quarantine. Like, they're not going to put an asterisk on your grades. And so if you're somebody that was looking forward to that education, or you feel comfortable with that education, then why are you putting yourself behind the 8 ball for something that you don't have to do right now? And it's understandable that people don't believe in online. Like, again, that's a big philosophical discussion amongst educators, but there's some people that just don't believe in the online format of teaching, and they don't learn that way. And it's not really up to us to say they have to. And so I can see that definitely being the biggest deterrent because a lot of people are saying that, once again, if we come back online in the fall, I better see a significant reduction in costs, because why should I pay the same to get something that I didn't ask for? And that's going to be a big thing. So now, outside of the tuition in class, which is the biggest thing, there's the on-campus resources as well. I mean, the fact is, you just can't utilize them. You can't go to the rec, for a Zumba class. You can't go to tutoring services to get help with the math class. You can't go to the library and check out a couple books, or check out an iPad, or check out a camera to do a project. You just can't. There's a mad scramble to move a lot of these resources through virtual. But the fact is, there's still only a select number of things that you can do. And even then, interacting with it is not the same. And so how do you look a student in the face and tell them, okay, you're going to give us all this money and it goes to these different things that you are entitled to as a student, but now you can't even access them? And so that is a big part. And again, another philosophical discussion. But for a lot of traditional education, that is a big part of going to a higher education institution, because it's not just the classes, because we know there's online classes, community college classes, all that. It's the resources. And so in a time where a lot of people are fighting before the pandemic, fighting and asking schools to justify that big price tag, you're now really going to be in a hard spot to really make it seem feasible when you aren't even given the extra things that come with being a student. And as much as we try to do things online and virtually, I don't believe people are going to look at that as something that should cost the same. And overall, I think the biggest part, or one of the biggest parts, is the transition. Whether you're looking at classrooms, you're looking at online resources, all that, it's a very important area of college, in higher education, I should say. We're talking about retention. We're talking about first year experience. We're talking about the transition. Whether you're looking at housing and resident assistants, or any housing professionals, trying to work with incoming freshmen and their parents to help them transition to living somewhere, whether you're talking about tutoring services for freshmen, or, general education classes as students transition from high school rigor to college rigor, whether you're talking about retention services through mentoring programs, through transition classes, whether we're talking about skill, professional developments, time management, whatever, there is a long list of requirements throughout the whole ecosystem of higher education that are focused towards the first year transition, because people know that it's different, and it's different on a number of different levels, whether it's emotional, whether it's physical, whether it's psychological. Students are going through this change, and it's often a very scary time for some people. And, I don't know the numbers, but I would guess the average student, about a month or so, they kind of get settled in. Some students go back home, but they make that transition eventually. And that's fine. But that first few weeks are critical. It can make or break And as much as we look at some people have success, we're like, okay, they were all already going to have that success. We don't know that. We don't, one bad day could have made things go left instead of going right. And so the transition of moving on maturity wise from secondary education to post-secondary, in whatever form it is, whether it's community college, whether it's trade, whether it's online and physical, whatever, it is a very important step. And there's a lot of resources put into it that can't necessarily be utilized or leveraged. And so that's an area that I'm very interested in as far as the retention and transition piece. And so I can definitively say that if we were to look at a future where we don't open the school up physically for the fall, it could be catastrophic for a lot of freshmen, and it would be very hard to help them transition, because then you're really setting up yourself for two pitfalls. Number one, the virtual resources you're given aren't enough to really get that student engaged, and they fall off. Or number two, they transition to this new world of online. And then when we do come back to campus, now there's another transition they have to make. And that's not the way the resources and the way the programs are set up. And so you would definitely have to change things around again. And so I think that transition piece is really big. So for all those reasons, I say take a gap year. A gap year is usually something people take after they graduate college before they go full-time work. But some people take gap years after high school. At this point with the quarantine, it's not the same amount of options that you would have. But I say take advantage of some things. A lot of online tools are free right now or discounted. Whether you're talking about learning some new skills, whether you're talking about looking at a MOOC, which is a massive online community, but where you take online classes that are free. They don't bear credit, but they're free, and they're usually like some type of niche type class. And so you could really, I would say, as a freshman coming or a senior graduating high school going into freshman year, I would say you could really look into an Excel class and start working with Excel. If you haven't got into coding, get the student into working with some coding and looking at some IT areas that they might be interested in. This is a time to really start exploring, especially with those virtual tools, as you start to think about what you want to do, because a lot of times college happens really fast. And as much as you got resources, I don't know that students always have the most time to think about what they want their major to be until it's too late, where you fail in a class or you start to feel like this major class is too hard and now you want to switch, or you get behind and you want to switch to a major that helps you graduate earlier. I think this is a time to really do that exploration. Do some type of graphic design. There's so many options, and I think students know this more than even we do, but beyond just the YouTube and everything, there are master classes out there being taught by professionals. Obviously there's a lot of tutorial videos. There's Khan Academy. Brush up on some skills that you might feel like you didn't learn, especially my students coming from underprivileged schools. Brush up on some skills. Maybe you feel like, I really don't understand fractions. I'm about to graduate high school and I don't understand fractions. Start to look at that type of stuff. Maybe take a creative writing class or join a writing community where you can start writing. You get a prompt and you write a page every day and you start working on your writing skills. Take this year. Maybe you can get a job at as a seasonal or temporary with the grocery store, stocking and stuff, so you could get some money. So that's always on the table. But also in your spare time, start working on things. Start to build some skills in that gap year. If things start to open up more where we are less restricted, then yes, go ahead and start looking into some programs that you might be able to do, whether it's volunteer or interning somewhere. And that's one of the biggest things too. If it's something you want to do, then reach out to people that are doing it. You never know what they might say. They might be happy. You might want to be a future lawyer. And, let's just say we get off quarantine and you want to be a future lawyer. Hit up a lawyer that's local, or hit up, your local government and see if you could be in contact with police enforcement or something, and just see if you can shadow or come talk to them, interview something. Start building up some skills, start building up some experiences for yourself that can be pretty applicable once you get into the college world, and helps you with a little resume booster, but it also helps you stay engaged, and it helps you jumpstart, your career path as well. Because even if they open up in the spring, let's say fall 2020, hey, we're online, and then by December they're like, hey, okay, we found a cure or whatever, everything's open again. Then you can start in the spring. You might be a semester back. But I think the problem that a lot of people will have is that they get this real fear of immediacy. You see it with college seniors. I got to get to this school. I got to get into this major. And I tell students all the time, tell parents all the time, it's not where you start, it's where you end. It's cliche, but it's true. That first job that you get out of college more than likely won't be the job that you stay with. That major that you pick as a freshman in college more than likely won't be the major you stay with. A lot of things do change, but we fixate on the now. And so it's like, I got to be on time. I got to graduate in 4 years. And it's like, trust me, you got a lot of life ahead. You rather get to the right place than just get into a place. And so if you have to start a year back, or if you have to start a semester back, you will be better for it financially, not sinking a lot of money into an institution that needs money but can't offer you the same services, by jumping into a class that you aren't really transitioned and prepared for, and it's not traditional to the way you learn, and everything else, you're not receiving those resources. So for me, I would personally say, if I had a student that I'm advising, or if I had a child, I would say take a gap year. This is a time to really put an investment into your personal development. And unless the schools are going to be functioning at the same capacity, I wouldn't sink an investment into higher education at this point. So that's how I feel. Go to the comment section. Let me know how you feel. Share around, get the conversation started. And thank you for listening.